Hey, it's Rachel Cooke, your modern mentor. I'm the founder of Lead Above Noise, where we help leaders tweak how their teams do the work so that results stay strong and engagement and well-being thrive inside the work. When leaders struggle with this, no one wins. I would love to come speak at your next event or offsite to deliver the clarity, confidence, and tools your leaders need to bring this shift to life. Reach out today at leadabovenoise.com/connect. So today it is my pleasure to bring you a conversation that I think is the perfect way to start off a new year. At this moment, when so many of us are thinking about what we want and who we want to be and how we show up, today I get to share with you a chat that I had with Ira Bedzow. Ira is the executive director of the Emory Purpose Project and a professor at Emory's Goizueta Business School, the School of Medicine, and the Center for Ethics. He's a leading voice on purpose-driven leadership and ethical decision-making. Basically, how we align our choices with our values and actually live with intention. And here's the thing, purpose and ethics can sound like really lofty concepts, but Ira makes them active. Not the things we hope for, but the things we cultivate. And he shares some really tangible ways that any of us can start building what he calls a muscle for reflection right now. So dive in and enjoy. So Ira Bedzow, professor at the Goizueta Business School at Emory University. What an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this.
Amazing. So Ira, as you know, but as my listeners will not know, I found you through a little bit of selfish, gentle creeping. As I mentioned to you in our first conversation, my daughter happens to be a student at Emory University. So I'm very invested in things that are going on around town and around campus. And through some randomness of Google's, I landed on you and some of the really, really fascinating work that you're doing there around. Well, it was the word purpose that really, really caught my attention, and I was so fascinated. And so I would love it if you could just quickly explain. I know you do a lot of things, but give us the high level kind of what are you doing there these days?
Sure. First, thank you for Googling me. I'm sure that wasn't weird, at least not for me. I'm glad you did that. Let me just start by talking about what I mean when I work in purpose, because every time I use that word without context, it's very overwhelming. I mean, oftentimes when you think about purpose, at least when you're younger, although when you're older too, it's, well, I have to find my purpose that the world or some higher power has laid out for me, or I have to create a purpose in my life. Otherwise, my life is either, having no meaning or I don't matter. And there's just this huge bar to overcome or to jump over, where your life is determined by either what you find, what you're given, or what you can create. And it's just too much. It's literally just too much to start there. So when I work in purpose, I don't think about purpose really as a noun or a thing. I think of purpose as a verb and as a lens. So what I mean by that is I want people to be more purpose oriented in how they live their life. That it doesn't necessarily mean more intentional, although intentionality is really important to me, but I want them to think about who they are, who they want to become, and how they can develop the skills, the tools, and the capacities to do that in a way that speaks to what they care about, as opposed to at the expense of their values. So when I do this type of purpose work, really I'm thinking about a competency-based education. Like, I'm not teaching about purpose, I'm teaching people how to be more purposeful. So we think about what intellectual skills they need to know or to learn in terms of what are their beliefs and where do those beliefs come from? What are their aspirations, and are those aspirations worth having? What do they care about, and why do they care about those things? Are those about internal motivations, or are those about societal or external expectations? So we think about those things intellectually and how to really reflect on those. We think in terms of psychosocial, do they have a sense of agency? Do you have a sense of psychological flexibility, which doesn't necessarily mean mental gymnastics? That has been I've had to clarify this for a while. It means that if the first shot you take doesn't land, how can you still get what you want going in a different direction, right? Like if you say, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people and you don't get into medical school, are there other ways that you can help people such that if you don't become a doctor, you could still be purposeful in a different way, right? So agency, psychological flexibility, emotional regulation, and the ability to be resilient. Although there's been a great word that I heard recently called transilience, which is not the ability to bounce back, but the ability to transcend given obstacle. And then on the interpersonal side, thinking about how to engage in and act purposefully with others. Because even if purpose speaks to who you are and what you care about, you don't really pursue purpose alone. So then how do you think about working with others who may not have the same destination as you, but you could still go along that journey with them for at least part of the way? How do you recognize that when people are different from you, that you still might have shared values or commonalities? How do you find ways to work with others, disagree with others, be in relationship with others, even when those bridges are hard to build? So that's the type of competencies we actually really think about. You think about how do we incorporate it in the classroom? How do we reinforce it in extracurricular activities so that they're not classroom skills, but life skills? And then, which is really the hardest part, actually it's all hard. How do you think about the hidden curriculum in terms of don't do as I do, do as I say? Like that never works. So how do you do as I do and as I say? So how do we work with faculty and staff to live out these values and this orientation as well, so that students not only learn about it, but they see it everywhere on campus?
Wow. So that's all? That's all you're doing in a
Yeah,
day?
that's all. I mean, it's not so tough. Actually, I mean, that was a joke. It's actually really tough, but it's really worth it. I mean, I got to tell you, I've done a lot of things in my life. Like I worked in real estate finance and development, worked in healthcare. Have a PhD in religion, and I find that this type of work really allows all of the things that I care about, which is, intellectually stimulating, being creative, trying to help people, not to learn what I want them to learn, but for them to learn about themselves in ways that help them in life. It has it all. Like it really allows me to play in so many different sandboxes, but still converge into the things that I want to do in life. So I'm just really grateful that I was able to find this type of job.
I love the way that you did some of that setup and you talked about it as, I think you said you think of it as more of a verb than a noun, right? It's not something that we achieve, but it's something that we actively cultivate. And there are actually competencies and practices, which is what I'm so fascinated by because I find that, I do a lot of work in the corporate realm. And I find that there are people out there, a lot of people out there who believe if you're working in corporate, if you're working in finance, maybe if you're working in real estate, these are not purpose driven industries. So we have to then observe our faith on weekends. And that's the only way for us to achieve purpose. You can only be a really purpose driven person if you're in healthcare, if you are saving babies. And I think you and I share a belief that purpose can be found and cultivated and activated in any of these realms. I'm curious for you, you sort of in talking about your sequence, you said you were in, I think you said real estate finance, and then eventually you were in religious studies. Do you feel like your own sense of purpose was clear back in your real estate days? Was it something that you felt you came to in your study of religion? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I will give a plug to real estate in this. I will say this, my professional and basically my personal purpose as well. And again, when I say my purpose, I mean the way I engage the world in a way that speaks to who I am, who I want to be, and how I want to get there is I want to help people not take their thinking for granted so that they can come up with more creative and more effective solutions in their lives. So that took time. Like as a 20-year-old, I didn't realize that that's what gets me up in the morning. Like I danced around it, right? But at the same time, like when I worked in real estate, it wasn't against what I wanted to be. It incorporated what I wanted to be and helped me grow to be who I am now. So for example, I was speaking with someone the other day and telling them about, how I used to work in real estate and the buildings that I used to sell and finance and so forth. And they said, it's so not you. Like, I don't even understand how you can be in that. Like, look at what you do. How does real estate even work for you? And I said, I don't think you understand. Like, when I saw, like, either real estate finance or even real estate development, when I saw like buildings go up, it spoke to who I am as a builder, meaning I love building programs, building ideas, like building people up. When I looked at real estate, it wasn't simply about like financial modeling, although that was pretty fun. It was about thinking about who would live in these multifamily units, who would work in this retail and office space. What would this do for the community where this building is going to be located? Like, I looked at condo docs and thought about my political theory classes. So it was a matter of like thinking not just this is what I do, but how can I bring myself into what I do? That's where this purpose orientation comes from. And I don't think you need to solely be in a calling or a profession to do that. A profession is easier because you have a long-standing tradition that has expectations for who or for what the profession wants you to be and what your responsibilities are to be a member of that profession. But there's a sense of professionality in all types of occupations, because professionality really means that I hold myself to a certain standard and I have responsibilities not only to myself, but to the people that I serve. And that plays out in anything that you do.
Absolutely. So I'm curious. So you're teaching in the business school. So presumably some number of your students have some degree of work experience under their belts.
So let me be a little bit clearer, maybe. I do work in the business school. In the business school, I teach undergrad business ethics and I teach leadership classes for the MBA. I used to and still do teach in the law school where I've taught leadership for lawyers. I've taught health law and bioethics classes. And sometimes I'll teach Jewish law as like a comparative law class. I've taught in undergrad, or I'll teach moral leadership. I'll teach courses on identity and community integration. I'm actually teaching a PE class next semester where, yes, this is amazing and I have to talk about it, where we are going to be talking about the relationship between mind and body, developing attention, understanding habit formation and community and identity, all while riding spinning bikes. So it will be a spinning class as well as an academic class, because I want the students to not only learn about attention, but to learn what does it mean to give attention when you're doing something. I don't want students to only think about the relationship between mind and body, but I want them to think about the relationship between mind and body when they're so tired spinning that they don't know how to answer the question that I'm asking them. Though I will also be on a spinning bike. I have been training. But this is all to say, like, I do teach in multiple different schools to multiple different types of students, but it is all the same thing, right? It's about teaching people how to be intentional and cultivating the skills that will allow them to not only live their best life, but to lead others in a way that's authentic and productive.
So I'm curious. I feel like there are a lot of people out there who have this experience of, I know what's right. I think most of us know what's right. And in the context of business, where we are beholden to a board, perhaps shareholders, we have to show quarterly results. And sometimes doing the thing we need to do for profit, whatever it might be, may not be the thing that feels the most right. And I'm curious how you talk to students about that in terms of the balance between the ethics of doing what's right for society, for community, maybe what's doing right for shareholders. How do you help people think through that?
Yeah, so I talk to students in the same way I speak to professionals and organizational leaders about this. I never start with knowing what's right, and I never start with what someone should do. Because if you start with what someone should do, you're creating an external imposition upon them where they can't act out of integrity. They have to act out of compliance. So I always start with, what do you want to do? That does a few things. One, it's a pulling as opposed to a pushing, and it lets me get this to their like gut reactions. Like, if I know what they want to do, I can ask them, depending on like how this plays out, of are they reacting? Are they responding? What is pulling them into that want? Is it something about them? Is it something about the situation and so forth? But we start with wants. Then I ask them, do you want to do that? So that sounds really difficult, but basically what it means is like, I know that this is what you want to do in the moment, but does this speak to who you are in addition to what you want to do? So for example, like if I say I am someone who like has a real sweet tooth, and every time like candy is passed, I want to take some, but I also don't want it. I want to be able to either have the self-control, or I want to forget even the self-control. I want to just let it pass by without it like pulling at me. Then I know that I have either a situational issue that I have to figure out because I'm being pulled by environment, or a dispositional issue that I have to figure out because why am I always being pulled in things that I don't want to be pulled by? But as this plays out, it's always about wants. It's never about shoulds, because I do think people want to do the right thing. Sometimes they just get pulled by urges, and sometimes they just don't know what the right thing is, given the context in which they're in. So that's how I play it out. Another thing that I do, and I may be talking too much, but although I feel like I'm not talking too much because you are interviewing me, so I'm just going to keep going.
You're good.
I never ask people why they want to do something. I either ask them, like, what is it about the situation that is having you come up with this answer? Or paint me a picture of what this means to you in practice. Because if I ask why, then they're going to justify their reason. If I ask them, how does this answer arise, or paint me a picture, they're going to describe and explain, and they may come to their own conclusions of whether this is a good idea or not, or it actually speaks to what they're trying to achieve or not. So I don't use typical ethics language of like, this is good and bad, or this is right or wrong. I speak really more closely to what are your goals? What are your values? What are your aspirations? And how does who you want to be affect what you want to do?
Wow. That's a really interesting framing. There is this researcher, just really quickly, that I'm thinking about right now. I believe her name is Ruth Chang, and she's done work on making hard decisions. And one of the things that she talks about, or at least something I've taken away from her work, is that by definition, a hard choice does not have a right answer. If there is a right answer, it is not a hard choice. It is just a lot of math to be done or a lot of data to be collected. But if it is an answerable question, it's not a hard choice. If it is a hard choice, there isn't a singular right answer. The question is kind of what you're describing, in service of what. So what's better, M&Ms or Skittles, is technically a hard question because there isn't a right answer. It depends. What are you craving? Is it chocolate? Is it lemon lime? Whatever it might be. And so I love the framing that you're using there, because ethics, in my mind, as a layperson, I think of ethics as lots of shoulds, right? And there are rights and wrongs, and you're a good person or a bad person. And I love the way that you're kind of stripping the binariness out of that, and everything is about context. And I do love your default belief that most of us usually want to do the right thing. I hope so.
Yeah, no, I will tell you. I mean, hard choice sounds a lot like the wicked problems or complex adaptive challenges. And a lot of times, the reason why we get into hard choices or quote unquote dilemmas is because we're constrained by thinking about things in an either or. But if you take an innovator's model and think of like all of the different ways you can answer this question, the good, the bad, the ugly, the ones that don't work, the ones that are way too creative. Like, but if you just come up with more and more ideas, it becomes easier to see choices emerge because you're not constrained by the either or. Either or basically means that I have to choose between two values that are incommensurable, like community safety versus individual liberty, right? Like they're just in tension, right? But if you say that no, there's a spectrum instead of an either or, you may be able to find ways where values are in tension, but some answers emerge as a better balance than just choosing one versus the other. Another way to think about this is complex adaptive challenges will always lead to another challenge, right? So the way to think about it is I'm not going to be solving the problem. I'm going to be mitigating the problem and preparing myself for the next one. right? If you do it that way, then the work is never done. Well, at the same time, you're still making progress. Yeah, it is like building a muscle.
So I'm curious, when you talk about the competency based learning or teaching that you're doing in this realm, what are some of the competencies or the skills or the practices that students are learning or practicing?
Yeah, that's a hard one because there's so many of them. So I would say this, like a lot of times I'll just give you some that are more general. A lot of times leaders think that they have to provide answers, and in providing answers, they forget to listen well. So we spend a lot of time both directly and indirectly thinking about listening. And when we think about listening, we also think about what types of questions that we're asking, right? So, for example, I have one exercise that I have students do where I make them just pair up and talk about, what they did over the weekend. It doesn't really matter what they do, right? And the first time they do the exercise, the person speaks and the other person doesn't ask any questions. They speak for about 3 minutes. Then the person who speaks writes down what they experienced, meaning what did they communicate? What did they not communicate? What was their inner monologue and so forth? The listener does too. Then they determine together, like, did they understand the same thing? Then I have them do it again where they switch, but they learn the difference between pointed questions, directed questions, and open-ended questions. Well, a pointed question is, this is an amazing interview, right? Like, there's only one answer to that. Right. A directed question is not as pointed, but still limits the scope of the potential answers. And then an open-ended question would be like, what is a good interview to you? Meaning, like, I have no idea what that means, but you can tell me based on like that simple prompt, any number of different things that I'll learn a lot more than what I could have expected. Right. So then I have them go back and have the listener now ask those types of questions. And then they see if their experiences are the same, but then they also get a discussion of how much power did the speaker or the listener have in directing the flow of the conversation. And to a T, almost always, the pairs recognize that the listener has more power than the speaker does, because even if the speaker starts thinking of where the conversation is going to go, it's really hard not to answer a question that's asked you. Right. So then the listener is the one who really can direct the control of where this conversation goes. So use your questions wisely and then try to figure out how to get as much information as possible. Right. So we think about listening as a skill. In order to reinforce that, students have to do participation posts. So instead of telling me what they, like heard or what they learned in a session, instead I have them identify what a student, say what the student said what their original assumptions were, what the student said, or how what the student said changed their assumptions, and what do they think now? And what that forces them to do is not to listen to me, but to listen to other students. Because oftentimes, whether you're in a classroom or a boardroom, you always have like deference to authority bias, where you just look at the leader or the person in the front of the room, and that's the person you listen to. So this trains them to listen to all of the other people in the room to see where good ideas might come from, right? So we do that on listening. We do that on like thinking about choices. We do that on thinking about what our gut reactions and biases are. But we like break down all the cognitive and emotional components of decision making, and then we fine tune and tweak all of those in our classes. Like that's kind of how I run my ethics and leadership courses. And then we do case studies at the end to bring it all together. It's kind of like drills to scrimmaging to then playing a match.
And that's amazing because it really hammers home the point about how purpose it doesn't live in an industry. What you just described can be a set of interactions and practices that can happen anywhere. It's funny because I was going to ask you, my next question was going to be, but I think you've started to answer it for me. I wanted to explore the role that purpose plays in the realm of kind of connection, because I know I feel like purpose and connection are two things that people are struggling with these days, people across generations, across geographies. And I feel like what I just heard you start to describe, but I would love for you to expound on it, is a way in which purpose and connection are kind of coming together. I mean, I heard you really just describing meaningful, real dialogue more than just transactional conversation. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Like purpose and connection, I definitely agree with you. Are the things that, if I had to name two things that people are searching for, those are the two things. And you would think that they are at odds because purpose speaks to like individual identity and connection speaks to how I fit with other people. And I think both of them we tend to do wrong most of the time. We think purpose is something that speaks to a job, a social role, or a societal expectation. And connection is like what external factors create boxes that allow me to fit in so I have connection by virtue of how other people think of me, right? Where I think both of them are actually really two sides of the same coin when we look at it differently. If purpose is about being purpose oriented, then it means who am I? Who do I want to be? And how can I get there? It forces you to be much more attentive, much more curious, and much more open. And this is where the kicker is kind of self-reflection is always done better when done with others. Like Rachel, imagine self-reflecting silently to yourself. Now imagine speaking out loud. Now imagine pre-briefing or debriefing with a friend. What's more impactful for you?
Totally the latter.
Great. And while you're doing the latter, you're also connecting to that person and they're connecting to you. And what that does on the connection is you're no longer together by virtue of your race or your color or your gender or what school you went to. You're together by virtue of the shared experience of being vulnerable or of like sharing who you are or giving of yourself to listen to another person. I'd much rather have that type of connection than connection by virtue of a list.
Absolutely. It's interesting because, again, a lot of the work that I do is in the corporate realm. I sound like a broken record. And one of the conversations that's happening a lot these days is that leaders are feeling very disempowered to deliver these experiences to their teams, right? I'm hearing things from leaders like, oh, our employee engagement scores are really low. People don't feel trust. They don't feel purpose. They don't feel connection. They feel lonely. But the executive leaders aren't investing in programs. They're not doing the things they need to do in order to help my employees. And one of my biases, and it sounds like you and I share this, is there is so much within a leader's locus of control, an employee's locus of control as well. But for a leader who feels that sense of responsibility for wanting to enhance or improve the experience their teams are having at work, I always tell them, yeah, go ahead and advocate to your senior leadership for the programs that you believe you need, but really focus on looking inside your locus of control. Where do you have the power to start having more trusting conversations, to have more meetings that are actually dialogue, that are actually connection and sharing, and not just you delivering updates while people take notes? So I think there's something really empowering and inspiring in what you're describing. And I hope that people listening who may be sitting inside an organization at any altitude are feeling that sense of empowerment.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought this up. This is actually a really interesting thing to think about because oftentimes leaders think that they have to provide things. But when it comes to purpose and values and meaning, it's more about mattering than it is about consuming, right? Like, just like I say, I can't give people purpose. I can't give people meaning. I can provide opportunities for them to develop a sense of being purposeful and develop a sense of mattering through agency and empowerment. It's the same thing in an organization. If I was a leader of an organization and said, these are our values, what do you think an employee's going to say? No, those are your values. You didn't even ask me what I care about, right? So like, instead of thinking about what programs can we offer people for them to have a sense of mattering, why don't we provide the space for people to create the ways that they can show up and matter, right? Oftentimes, one of the biggest challenges in leadership is the losing touch, right? Like you get to such a position that you not only don't speak to people at lower levels of the hierarchy, but you have just no idea what's going on in their head. Like you have no way of getting communication through it. But if there was a way to get communication, then not only do you gain information, but you also give them a sense of being seen and mattering. It's almost like the listening exercise I just described at an organizational level. Right? Because that listening then allows you not to necessarily create something, but to make room for something to develop. right? Like you can dictate product goals. You can dictate processes, although that could be a problem depending on how much you know about processes, but you can't dictate culture, right? So once you realize that, don't try. Do something else. Allow culture to develop based on the values you want, which means show people that you actually care about those things. And if they care about it too, it grows together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you and I are absolutely singing from the same playbook. And I tell leaders all the time that by doing the act of asking and listening, that is already part of the intervention because of the piece that you just described, because you are telling your teams what your experience is, what your ideas are, they matter to me. And even just hearing them and absorbing them meaningfully um, moves you forward, in my opinion, on the path towards building trust or whatever the experience is. So, Ira, I want to be so mindful of your time. I've so enjoyed and appreciated this conversation. So, I want to ask you, my final question is, what call to action do you want to leave listeners with today? What is one thing, one practice, one wish that you want to put into the world that people would just kind of pick up and run with?
I really don't like this question. I'll answer it, but let me first tell you why I
Okay.
don't like it. Um, I don't know your listeners' lives. I don't know the organizations that they're in. I don't know the companies that they work for. And if I said, what's the one thing that they could do? I'm, sitting here on my own perch telling other people how to live their life, which like, I can just like understand, like the best I can do is understand their context to help them know what the one thing or the multiple things are for them. But if I had to answer your question, I would say don't settle at the first or second option. Try to think of as many options as possible before don't be indecisive, but try to think of multiple options as opposed to doing what you're already doing. There's so many ways to be creative, and creativity is really fun if you let yourself do it. Just don't be scared of it.
I love that. I think that's perfect. And I am grateful that you answered it
Yeah,
against your will. Thank you.
you really twisted my arm. I got to tell you.
It's what I do. It's what I do, Ira. It has been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you. I can't thank you enough for the wisdom and the insight. And I am going to send my daughter to hunt you down on campus. So you've been warned.
No, I appreciate it. Have her come. Really excited to meet her.
You know I will. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Rachel.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ira Bedzow. Learn more about his work at Emory's Purpose Project and find his writing in Forbes and other publications. Join me next week for another great episode. Until then, visit my website at leadabovenoise.com. You can follow Modern Mentor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks so much for listening and have a successful week. Modern Mentor is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Thanks to the QDT team, audio engineer Dan Firebend, director of podcasts Holly Hutchings, ad operations specialist Morgan Christensen, marketing manager Rebecca Sebastian, and our marketing contractor Nat Hoops.